Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Councilman Jim Waring, and joining me on today's show is Phoenix Police Commander Darren Viner from the Black Mountain Police Precinct. Commander, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate you being here. You're relatively new as a commander up in Black Mountain. We've had a great lineage of commanders up there, as I'm sure you've probably heard. Your three predecessors I worked with were just phenomenal. So you have big shoes to fill, but I have every expectation you will be the person to fill them. But I thought it might be interesting today. We've had the chief on the show before. We've had officers on talking about crime statistics for the city as a whole. But you, as police commander, oversee a lot of the activity that goes on, not all of it, but a lot of the activity that goes on in District 2, and I thought that might be interesting for viewers of the show. I also thought it might be interesting, so your history as the officer, like how did you get into this, and what were the steps that led you to promotion, and then kind of what were the steps along the way to becoming a commander? So with that, first, why police? How did you wind up here?
Well, thank you for asking, and it's a pleasure to be on your show today. So I started out as a criminal justice major at Arizona State University back in 1986. I came out here on a track and field scholarship and attended ASU for 5 years. And so at the conclusion, when I graduated from ASU, I moved back to Colorado to be a probation officer. And my best friend that I came to Arizona State with stayed here in the Valley and joined the Scottsdale Police Department. And so during that year, as I worked as a probation officer and communicating with him about his experiences as a police officer in Scottsdale, I became intrigued with the profession and ultimately decided to move here to Phoenix. And I joined the Scottsdale Police Department in January of 1993. So I've been involved in law enforcement for 27 years this month. After about 2.5 years with Scottsdale Police Department, as I tell my old Scottsdale friends, I saw the light and decided to become a Phoenix police officer and transitioned over to Phoenix.
Well, I've met a few of your old colleagues from Scottsdale knocking on doors. We have Scottsdale officers who have the good sense to live in Phoenix. So I've met a few of them over the years. But, I mean, what was it like? So you were a frontline officer in Scottsdale.
Yes.
And what prompted the change?
Well, as you might imagine, the activity and the opportunities are a lot less in Scottsdale. And I really wanted to be part of something bigger. And Phoenix was the big boys on the block, so to speak. So at the time, you know, we had 80 different specialty units that you could be a part of. We had the activity, Phoenix had the activity that would help you to become a more experienced and seasoned officer quicker. And so that's why I made the change.
Well, I knew a lot of folks. I got my master's and PhD in public administration at ASU, but the departments were close by, and so there were a lot of people getting master's degrees in criminal justice, as you suggest, who were colleagues of mine that I'd see, and we'd talk about things around the water cooler and so forth. So I am curious, did you find the education you got at ASU, did it translate into the real world?
I believe so. I believe certain aspects of it did, but to be honest with you, in policing, the only thing that really translates is the actual experience, and you gain that from starting at the academy. The Phoenix Regional Police Academy does a fantastic job in preparing our officers for the actual job itself. So some of the academic side of things did translate, but in all honesty, it was the practical experience through the police academy and the FTO, the field training program, that really translated into helping me to be an effective police officer.
So stepping back, you came back to Arizona, you applied to the academy, and then how long did that process take? Maybe start to finish from application to graduation?
Well, again, going back, so I applied with Scottsdale PD, which is different than Phoenix.
Sure.
At the time, they were requiring a 4-year degree, where Phoenix requires a high school diploma now. But I believe it took me I was fast-tracked. It took me about 3 months to get through the entire process. And their process is very similar to what our process is. There's an 8-step where you go through a whole myriad of for lack of a better term, weeding out selection process to ensure that we get the best of what the community has to offer. And so if you're interested in what that looks like, I was recently the commander of our Employment Services Bureau before I took the Black Mountain Precinct position. So that consists of a written exam, it consists of a physical agility, a background, a polygraph, you have a drug screening, you have psychological testing as well as a medical test to ensure that you're well suited for the job.
Translated for the citizens at home, we don't take just anybody and put them out on the street. It's a rigorous process
Is
and
very
a big
rigorous.
background check too.
Yes. So to give you an idea, out of 300 applicants, we get about 25 folks who are qualified to go to the police academy.
And that's not getting through the academy, that's going
That's
to
just
the
going
academy.
to the academy. And in that, you have about a 17% attrition rate from there. And then you further have more of attrition as they move through the field training program, and even more so as they move through the process of becoming a solo capable officer off of probation. So, you know, if you were to look at the numbers from those that we take from the 300 who apply all the way down to a solo capable officer, you may be looking at about 15, 12 to 15
I was just trying to do math in my head, and that's about, I'm like, 10 to 15 at the max.
That's a very rigorous
out of 300 applicants, and when you're trying to fill hundreds of spots like we've been doing the last couple of years, it becomes a numbers issue.
And keeping up with attrition, because we're losing on average about
Exactly. If you're trying to advance the ball, like add 300 officers or something like we've done some years, that's really tough.
That's
when
right.
you have to do it that way, because you have to get thousands of applicants just to get the people to replace the people who are retiring, and then in addition add people. It's quite the challenge, particularly in a full employment economy where people do have other options as well.
That is correct.
I would argue in the full employment economy, you're getting people who are really passionate about this work too. So, because there are options. Now, it sounds like you must have been, as a young man, you know, were interested in criminal justice because you became a criminal justice major. So somewhere this must have been flitting around in the back of your head that this is a career path, and obviously it has been. But so you applied to Scottsdale, went through their academy. Now you're a Scottsdale police officer. Tell us about the transfer process. I mean, you apply to Phoenix just like a job applicant, and then how does that work?
That's correct. So I had to go through the exact same process that I did with Scottsdale. I had to go through all the testing, the background, the polygraph, the medical, all of that.
Did you have to go through the academy again?
I did. At that time, we didn't have a lateral program. So
You wouldn't now, but you did then.
that's correct.
Yeah.
There was an abbreviated academy. I think it was about 5 weeks that I had to go through and test out, take all the written tests and go through all the proficiency testing before I could come over and go to the field training program. So yeah, at the time that was the system. Now we have a different system where we can bring people over as a lateral and they don't have to go through the academy.
Right. So if my chronology is correct, you started in 1993. Now we're up to about 1996, and now you're a Phoenix officer.
That's correct.
Roughly about 3 years between the training and everything.
Yes.
So what was your first job with Phoenix PD?
My first job was a patrol officer in the Central City Precinct. As we turned 500, Central City Precinct, I served a couple of years there, actually about 3 or 4 years there. Moved on to South Mountain Precinct and decided to take the sergeant's exam. So I had about 8 years on as a police officer in total, and tested for sergeant. Did very well. Scored number 5 out of my list, and got promoted immediately and was assigned to our Maryville precinct.
And Phoenix was growing during this period as a city,
was.
so now we're in the early 2000s when we had really fast growth.
That's
So
correct.
presumably it's before my time on the council, but I know we were hiring officers.
We were.
Left and right, so a lot of opportunities.
Yes.
So now you're probably in your early 30s and you're a sergeant. Is that kind of a typical about timeline?
That's correct.
Yep. And the 8 years did that include your Scottsdale?
That includes
stint?
Scottsdale time.
So
Yes.
So now you're sort of moving up in the ranks. What was being a sergeant like? How many people did you manage, and what were your responsibilities there?
Well, I had the 83 John Squad, which was a very, very busy time in the history of City of Phoenix out in Maryville Precinct. I had a squad of about 8 officers, and so it was.
Is that standard?
That's about standard. Yeah, anywhere from 8 to 10 officers is standard, and it was a great experience. It was very busy. I actually chose to go to Maryville. I had several choices because of where I placed on my list. But I chose to go there and to work night shift because I wanted something that was going to challenge me and that was going to make me better. And I knew by going to a very busy precinct like Maryville at the time that was going to help me to do that. So I had some relatively young officers overall, but they were very experienced because of all the repetitions that they got in dealing with major crime scenes. So that was a good experience for me.
Yeah, well, I've gone out on ride-alongs on the night shift over along the 17, and you're busy right away as soon as you drive away from the office, so to speak. It's right. Pretty busy. So there's no debating that point. Do you keep in touch with the fellows you either mentored or you were supervisor for? Is there kind of a close bond, or I know people scatter in different directions. It's a big city. There are 3,000 officers roughly.
One of the things about the department is, as you move on through your career, you tend to lose touch with a lot of the people that you worked with that you said you would never lose touch with. But that's just the nature of the job. It's very transient in nature if you have a desire to improve and move on and get different experiences. But I have made it a point to keep in contact with a number of people throughout my career. I've always wanted to maintain that connection with, no matter what level I promoted to keep that connection with those individuals that I worked with, especially the line level folks, because they keep you grounded. They give you a different perspective of what's going on at that level to where you don't lose that, because it's important, I believe, as a leader, especially in a police organization, that you maintain that sense of connection and understanding from the line level troops of what they're experiencing.
And some of those folks are still on the force. I mean, it's been forgive me, a fair amount of time now, 15 or so years, I'm guessing, based on the timeline I have in my head. So, those officers are still around, some of them, and
they are.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then, do you ever? So, as you move up in the ranks, do you get to say, I really enjoyed working with he or she? They were really, on top of their game. They were really good at job X. Does it work that way? Do you get to request them, or you just? Well, it's like you get whatever you get.
It can happen that way. It depends on the situation. If you have if you have command over a specialty unit, for instance, and that person decides to apply for that position, and you have a process to where you're able to have a little more subjectivity in how you select your people based on fit. Then if that person is a great fit for that particular detail, and their work ethic, and that they would do a good job there, you have that opportunity to make choices that way.
Do you ever go to them and say, I'm overseeing this particular unit now, I think you'd be really good at it? Does that conversation ever happen, or do they have to sort of self-select?
Well, it depends on the person. And to be honest with you, one of my mentors throughout my career advised me not to do that, and to if the person was interested in that particular position, that they'd figure it out, and then you don't want to have the appearance of being partial to individuals and having an unfair process. And I've noted examples of that throughout my career of individuals who may not have been the front runner, but they were given the opportunity to show up and compete, and they did very, very well and actually got the job. So we want to try to be fair in that process.
So now you're a sergeant. You're managing, 8 to 10, working the night shift.
Yes.
In Maryvale. So what came next? How long did you do that? And
I did that for about 6 years, and off and on. So I did that for about 3 years, and then I did a 2-year stint in our Family Investigations Bureau on a temporary. They had a need for an administrative sergeant. And in talking to some of my mentors, they would advise me that it's very important to get that administrative experience to where you get a broader picture of the organization and the city as a whole. And you understand some of the dynamics that are involved in that. So I went and did that for a couple of years, went back to Maryvale Precinct, and I think it was 2007, I was promoted to lieutenant. And so during that time, as far as my development, I know one of the things that really stuck in my mind or stood out to me was how important it was to be a good leader. And the department offers leadership training, but I wanted to go beyond that. So I decided to get my master's degree, and I went on to Grand Canyon University and I enrolled in their master's program in leadership with an emphasis on disaster preparedness and crisis management. So I did that and graduated in 2008, but I did it with the sole purpose of not necessarily to get the piece of paper that said I had a master's degree, but to actually take the practices and principles that I learned in that program and apply them to my job as a leader within the Phoenix Police Department. That was very, very valuable to me and still serves me well today.
I'm an ASU alum, as I think I suggested earlier, but I have worked a fair amount with GCU, and obviously a well-respected school, but I had not heard about that program. That's a
Yes.
fascinating title, and I'm sure they get a lot of applicants every year because that's sounds like that would cover interesting topics. What were some of the classes like?
Well, they were a lot of them were studies of leadership issues within in major corporations, corporate America. Some of them were geared toward obviously the disaster preparedness and crisis management aspect of it. It was a cohort that included a lot of Phoenix police officers, but we did have a mixture of other individuals from non-governmental organizations in different walks of life. So it provided a well-balanced perspective of leadership in all different walks of life.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So then you presumably applied to be promoted.
Yes.
At some level. So what was the next step?
Next step was to take the lieutenant's test. And I got to say that throughout my career, I've always had good mentors, people that people who reached out to me to provide me material, to provide me guidance on how to be successful in these processes. So as I took the sergeant's exam, as I took the lieutenant's exam, even the commander's process, I've always had that available to me, which I still try to do today in turn and reach back and help individuals to attain their goals too. So.
And that's the definition of leadership, I
Yes.
would argue, or certainly one of the definitions anyway. But so do you study for the test? I mean, are there like the pre-SAT or whatever, you're taking tests, right, to practice for the test? Does that happen, or how
Yes.
do you prepare for it?
Well, it depends on what level you're talking about. So sergeant's exam was more involved in being well versed in policy. So you had to study the entire operations orders at the time, which is I forget how many pages are in that, but it's a very, very thick book that you have.
So like an NFL official, you have to know the rules.
You have to know the rules, and that was a process to help and weed out a lot of folks who weren't necessarily prepared. But as you moved on to lieutenant, it was more application of knowledge. So it was taking some of the scenarios and issues you deal with as a leader and applying that knowledge, like search and seizure, personnel issues, and things of that sort. And that was a narrative, an essay format, to where you were asked a situation and then you had to apply the knowledge that you have and your experience to answer the question. And then there was also a project that you were given that you had to work in, and that determined on how you would allocate resources, how you would work with internal and external partners to solve a problem within the city, and then you were graded on that as well. And then you had an oral board process where you were asked specific questions about how you would deal with situations.
So what was your assignment as a lieutenant?
So as a lieutenant, I was promoted again back to Central City Precinct. I worked there for a while as a patrol lieutenant and then became the field training lieutenant. I then moved to South Mountain Precinct at a very tumultuous time in the city where there were some issues with the community, between the community and the police department. I was asked by the commander at the time, Chris Crockett, to go with him there and help. And that was probably one of the most important and rewarding times in my career. I went there as the field training lieutenant again, but had a secondary or primary, depending on how you look at it, responsibility of ensuring connectivity between the police department and the community. So that's what I was tasked with.
So shifting gears for just 1 second. So you've mentioned South Mountain, Central Phoenix, and Maryvale.
That's correct.
If I read a map correctly, those aren't right next to each other. So, like, where did you live during this time? Does that ever factor in? Do you get choices in, or do you just commute?
you commute. You know, the way things work here is you're assigned where you're assigned, and regardless of where you live, you have to go to work. You know, at the time, during those times in my career, I did live in the southern zone of the city, so the commute wasn't that bad. Thank God now I was assigned to Black Mountain Precinct, and I live in my precinct.
Oh,
so,
you do? Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah. So it worked out well.
Well, we're
for
happy
me.
to have you. That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, because that just, you know, that adds to, you know, just the normal stressors and everything else.
That commute.
You know, and I've always kind of wondered, because I've met officers in the area I represent just knocking on doors and so forth. They're like, yeah, I work at South Mountain. I'm like, wow, that's quite a commute. No, they like it, or they're night shifts, so it's, you know, it's what they want to do, and they want to live where they want to live. But
right.
you know, it's always been a fascination that, wow, that's a little bit of a haul from the different places that you work.
Yeah, and I think it depends on where you work too. If you're in a relatively active area where you're affecting a lot of arrests and there's a lot of crime, and let's say you work or you live somewhere in that area, there can be some issues, you know, as far as running into people that you contact
I hadn't even
on
thought
the day,
about that.
you know.
Yeah.
And so you might want to live in a different area, you know, in a situation like that. Whereas, you know, if you're in an area that's not necessarily like that, it's good to be a part of that community and living in that community and not having to worry about those.
That's
those
a
types of
factor I
things.
had never actually considered.
Right.
This is why we have you on the show, to
Right.
learn things, and that's an interesting facet of the job that I wouldn't necessarily have considered. People recognizing you at the grocery store or whatever, where maybe you've had to have an interaction that wasn't as pleasant
Right.
for them
Right.
anyway. But so now you're a lieutenant, and what was the next step?
So I worked that position for, I think it was 6 or 7 years, again in Central City Precinct and South Mountain Precinct.
And how many people do you oversee when you're a lieutenant?
As a lieutenant, it's anywhere between 40 to 50 people.
So it's a pretty big step up
It
from
is.
sergeant.
It's significant.
Yeah.
Yes, you're essentially a shift commander. So you have command over an entire shift of 3 to 4 squads at any given time. So yeah, I moved to South Mountain Precinct and did that job for a while, and then was asked to go to our Drug Enforcement Bureau, where I became the lieutenant over our Street Enforcement Unit, Narcotics Unit, which was comprised of undercover detectives, and did that work for about 3 years. That was from 2010 through 13.
Did you do any undercover work yourself?
No. So to a certain extent. So as a lieutenant of that unit, you know, I had officers and sergeants that did that, or detectives and sergeants that did that work. My job was to oversee that work. So I would be out on missions with them, overseeing the surveillance and the undercover operations, but not physically myself buying drugs and doing the things that our undercover detectives do.
Well, I remember when I was in the state senate, I was at lunch one day and a fellow came up to me and kind of weirdly smiled and moved on. And I was like, who was that? I mean, it was an undercover officer that I knew. I didn't recognize him at all. He was within a foot of me. He's like, he came back and he took off his hat and he had wig and so forth. And it was, or had grown his hair out, I forget. Yeah. And it was quite an illustrative experience that he was completely unrecognizable to me, just right up close, literally. Like, he made a point to get face to face. So it's always amazing what those folks go through, and God bless them for it. That's tough duty.
Yeah, it requires a special set of skills and talent to be able to do that. Not everybody can do that job.
I think master thespian or something, because that just seems like it would be really hard. Yeah. But that sounds like fascinating work and important work that you were in, both the drug enforcement, but also the facet of it that you were. It was
an awesome assignment. I'm very appreciative to the organization that I was able to do that for the time that I did it. You know, we were talking about promotions and matriculating through the department and raising in ranks. And I had the opportunity to take the commander's process right before that assignment happened, but I knew actually right when the assignment did take place. And I opted not to take the commander's process because I saw the value and being able to work that assignment and what it would, the experience it would provide for me, and then the experience that I would then be able to relate to my troops once I did decide to take the next step and promote to commander. And that's one of the most valuable things in this organization, is having the ability to move around and get the varied experience to where now you become a resource for your people. And so that was a very difficult decision I had to make, because do I promote now and move up the ranks a little more quickly, or do I take my time and benefit from this experience? So I opted the latter.
Well, that speaks incredibly well of you, that you passed up would be probably personally gratifying, obviously, to become a commander, which you did become, but you know, more earlier is better, I assume, career-wise, obviously, and that you stayed to do a job. I assume there are pay bumps with every promotion as well. So the fact that you were so committed to that work, really, as a Phoenician, I appreciate that very much. But that is really a testament to your commitment too,
well,
and we appreciate that.
And it just brings a different perspective to my position now, to where I can have command of a precinct like Black Mountain Precinct, where we have issues along those lines, to where now you can provide that type of guidance to your people.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think nationwide in that particular issue, but yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So then you took the commander's test, obviously. Now, I will say at this point, if I have the chronology correct, we'd been a growth department and a growth city. We were still sort of growing a little bit as a city, but we were not a growth department now for the period, I think, when you were probably a lieutenant, then going for commander. So when you take the test, and I think it's true in the military, which is not unanalogous, if that's a word I can make up, you have a lot of varied experience in your background. The military is the same way. They want you to get lots of different experience. You talked about administration and so forth. So it's a little bit all of them in different locations. But there has to be a spot for you to become a commander, even if you pass the test.
That's correct.
So when you were a sergeant, you were at the top of the class, and then we were definitely expanding as a department, so it sounds like it was immediate. Was that also true as a commander, or how does that work when we're not, expanding so rapidly?
As far as the timing and the promotion?
Yeah, so do you have to wait? How
you
does
have
that
to
work?
wait.
Yeah.
You have to wait.
That's what I thought.
So
how long was the wait?
My wait was, I think, about 18 months.
Yeah, I was going to say, I figured it would
if I
probably be
recall.
pretty long.
Yeah, I took the test about midway through my time in our Drug Enforcement Bureau, and about another 18 months or so is when I received notice that I would be promoted.
Well, I just got the signal. I'm embarrassed. We've gone so far, and we've got you up to commander, and we haven't talked about your current position.
Okay.
So really quick, we only have a minute or so. How many people do you oversee now? What's the budget like? And
with everybody involved, I'm at about 240 people at any given
so
time.
it's another big step up from lieutenant.
It's a huge step,
Yeah.
and the amount of responsibility that comes with being a commander over a precinct is enormous, because you are ultimately responsible.
Big responsibility.
Yes, you're ultimately responsible for the actions of all of your people that work for you there, and providing the service that the community deserves. And I can tell you that one of the things that has really stood out to me in becoming the commander of the Black Mountain Precinct is the support that we have from the community.
It's a very active community.
Very active community. And as you well know, we've been to coffee with the cop and the 3 council district meetings.
We're doing one tomorrow.
Exactly. The Black Mountain Community Alliance, the Anthem Roundtable, Public Safety Roundtable, all those things, all those events that I've been to in the short couple of months that I've been there have been very proactive. The amount of support from the community is huge, and it's really refreshing to see. So all I really need to focus on is ensuring that our officers don't erode that trust and that we have within the community by their actions, and that we're doing our work in a professional manner and making sure that we provide the community service that they deserve.
Well, we're very grateful for your service, Commander. I'm sorry to be rushed at the end, but we're having such a good time.
Yeah,
we let it go too long at the other conversation, but we'll have you back, and I really appreciate it.
I
very
appreciate the
much.
invitation, sir. Thank you.
If you have questions or comments, please call my office at 602-262-7445 or visit my website at phoenix.gov/District 2. And we look forward to seeing you next time on The Issues.